It's about partnership building, public and private. It's about fundraising, projects and operations, volunteer development, public relations and outreach and communications. I'm doing this presentation with Alex Pedro from Shaw Main Street, so I am giving a shout out to Shaw. Organization really brings the community together to build consensus and common vision. Now, I will stop at consensus because sometimes when I say consensus, everyone's like, well, no, everyone is not going to go along with us. Well, they won't. You're absolutely right. They won't. But you don't want people dragging with you or feeling like they did not have any involvement. Consensus means that I feel like, okay, I can live with that. Can live with what you have given me. So making certain that you are building consensus, common vision, and assembling resources to lead the revitalization. It fosters community engagement, encourages investment in revitalization, and it really promotes the revitalization efforts. It is very important to talk about and promote what you've done. Because if no one knows about the projects that you've completed, I don't care how small or big they are, they will think you're not doing anything. When you talk about public and private sector partnerships, it's really looking at the city government and county for the public sector, sometimes the federal or state. And the private sector is thinking about those neighborhood stakeholders, the community, the foundations, the banks that are in your community, those large corporations. How do you bring them together to make certain that they have value and commitment to the Main Street? Here's an example of a public and private sector partnership. And Boston Main Street, they created a foundation where the foundation's goals is really to support their 20 main streets in Boston. It's a partnership between the city of Boston, local foundations, and some of the local banks and corporations that really provides that level of support to make certain that the main streets are sustainable. Here's another great example in Greater Fort Lauderdale. This is another example where there were corporate partners, the city, it's not a main street, but there were corporate partners and the city came together to really make certain that they were revitalizing the corridor. Funding, really, this is really important about the development process. How much funding do you need? Look at your budget. What do you need? What does the district need and for what? Of course you need funding to support a person. So that's the organization piece. You need it for design. You need it to do the physical rehabilitation, education assistance and strategic planning. When you're thinking about that, economic vitality, providing that technical assistance to your small business owners. Events, promotion. When you're thinking about promotion, those events, image building. What do you need dollars for to support all of this work that you're doing? You use your work plans to define the budget and funding needs and really develop a funding plan that is inclusive of broad-based support. You never want your funding to be completed with one particular funding source. You want to have diverse funding. And I know that takes time. I'm not at all diminishing that. When you think about the funding responsibilities for your organization committee, these are the folks that are helping you with the fundraising materials, conducting those annual membership campaigns, implementing other fundraising activities, being the volunteers for the dinners and helping with that. The other committees are really helping you. Other committees, so I remember, it's not only organization, the other committees will come in to help. They're developing and implementing funding plans for the committee projects. It's really supporting fundraising activities of the organization across all 4 points. The staff is serving as that ambassador. That's the Main Street manager, or any staff that is employed at the Main Street. They should be the talking ambassador at all times for the Main Street and what's happening. They're recruiting new members. They're making sure the work plan is implemented. That is the person that's being held accountable generally by the board. When you're thinking about funding sources, I think this is a really nice breakdown. You want 30 to 50% from government, city, county, state, funding from the business district. That business district means the businesses, the property owners, the residents, partners, corporates, utilities. Don't forget your utilities. They do provide funding. Community funding is from your residents. The business outside of the district, civic organizations, foundations. Really, you want to make certain that you have that. And miscellaneous, maybe earned income. If you have a street cleaning crew, if you are working with a developer and you're able to get some developer services income, really thinking about other streams of funding that come in to support the work. Volunteer development is so important. You want to recruit your volunteers, you want to retain them, you want to recognize them at all times. When you're talking about volunteers, you need to gain that community support and provide community outreach. Do not ask me to volunteer on an economic vitality committee if you're on your Main Street. I do economic development every day. That's not something I want to do in my free time. But I might want to paint someone's face, I may want to take pictures, and I may want to lead a line dance. So meet people where they are when they're volunteering with you, because that's not something that they always may want to do. They gain more experience. This is how you are able to build the leadership of your residents, but also tap into expertise that may be in your community that you already have. You're able to accomplish more with limited funds through volunteers. And volunteers may not always be the traditional volunteers that look like the resident that has retired or the individual that's able to come to all events. It could sometimes be students at colleges that may volunteer as interns. It really just demonstrates a community support for the program, and it helps prevent burnout for the manager. The managers get burned out, they need help. Volunteers are something that really help those managers not get burned out. It's very important to understand that. When you're doing volunteer recognition, you can do in-person thank you cards. An in-person thank you cards, handwritten thank you cards is what I meant to say. Printed newsletters, annual reports, online websites, e-newsletters, etc. Just think about as many things as you can possibly do to thank you and recognize your volunteers, because it's so important. This is the volunteer value. I won't go a lot into this, but you can find this at independentsector.org. So you can really start calculating how much a volunteer would cost in your state. You want public relations is so important, that outreach and communication piece. Really measure, package, share district progress and impact at all times. That is the only way that the community knows what you're doing. It's the only way the city, your funders know what you're doing. Communicate and measure your value. You have to share that. And this is also the portal that I was talking about. Englewood Portal is a community in Chicago. And this public relations piece is really a way to combat all of the negative images that were being talked about for this community, who now has a new Whole Foods, who now has a new Starbucks, where everyone said no one would go to 63rd and Austin. But they have used the community portal as a way to showcase stories for local business owners, for residents, to really highlight the assets that are in that community. They have a really great Twitter feed called Good in Englewood. They were featured on the front page of the Tribune. So this is a way that they were able to combat a lot of the negative images that were being presented about the community. I'm going to turn it over to Alex.
So I've been asked to do a little bit of a deeper dive into three aspects of organization. Specifically communications, fundraising, and fundraising. So having this program today in this particular space is somewhat of coming full circle, because I was mentioning to Lauren Atkins from DSLBD that a decade and a half ago, we actually had the first ever DC Main Street training right here. And she was a presenter. She was with the National Trust for Historic Preservation at the time. And I know that Phil and some of our other executive directors were here as well. So, what comes around, what goes around comes around. And I'm glad to be able to say that 15 years later, we're still here. Here in Shaw, we've been able to attract and manage about $3 billion worth of investment, public and private investment. And that we've also been able to become the third of Washington, D.C.'s Great American Main Street Award winners. So we're the only, Washington, D.C. is the only urban program to have had 3 GAMSA winners. And hopefully the next GAMSA winner is in the audience today as well. So we do a lot of things in DC, Main Street-wise, that are different than what other programs around the country do, but there are things that we do that are very much the same. And I want to emphasize that here. that in the world of the organization sphere of Main Streets, first of the 4 points, everything is about relationships. And you could say, well, everything in life is about relationships. Well, yeah, that's exactly the point. And even more so here in Washington, D.C., everything is about relationships. So whether you're going to be applying to become a Main Street, or whether you've won the Great American Main Street Award, it's all about relationships. So you always hear about location, location, location. When it comes to organization, it's relationships, relationships, relationships. And we're talking about relationships with every potential stakeholder in your community. You can't leave any stone unturned, because everyone in your Main Street community has a stake in your success or your failure if you don't manage to gain the kind of support that you need in order to be able to be successful. And they also have roles to play in your success. You may not think that your neighborhood church has a particular role to play in your Main Street, or that they would benefit from being a supporter of your Main Street or providing input, but they absolutely would. And it's important to understand that it's not just about money. Very important. And as you explore becoming a Main Street, or as you develop a Main Street, you discover that there are resources far beyond dollars that are sometimes more important than dollars, as important as the funding is. So who are stakeholders in your community? So I'm just going to touch on some of the major categories. Some of them are obvious and some of them are less obvious. So obviously business owners. So we're talking about the small mom and pops. You're talking about the representatives of franchises, national chains, everyone who is involved with a business. And so when I say each of these categories, I'm not just talking about the leaders of those organizations, but all the way down the line. So whether it's the entrepreneur, him or herself, or whether it's a cook or a bottle washer in a restaurant or a server, everybody is a stakeholder within that business. Civic associations. So whether these are neighborhood associations or whether they are tenant associations for buildings, everyone who is a member of that organization or is a leader in that organization is a stakeholder. Elected officials are extremely important. Not only are they responsible for making sure that DC Main Streets continues to exist and has funding, but also they are very influential in terms of getting your initial designation. So you want to make sure that you are on good terms and communicate well with your council members and also your advisory neighborhood commissioners. ANC commissioners are on the ground. They're your grassroots level of District of Columbia government, and they can be invaluable in terms of making sure that your messages are communicated and that you're getting the kind of feedback that's necessary in order for you to be able to be successful. Faith-based organizations, whether these are churches, mosques, etc., that primarily have members of the residential community as their congregants or members, or whether they're commuter churches. These are all people who are part of your community. In some cases, these churches have been in the community longer than the community has had a name. Here in Washington, for a century or more. And they're all potential volunteers, and they all have additional resources that can be brought to bear to support your Main Street effort. It's also important as you're developing your boards that you make sure that you have representation from as many of these different stakeholder groups as possible. So when we first formed our board, we wanted to make sure that we had a representative from the neighborhood schools. We wanted to make sure that we had someone from the faith community. We wanted to have a senior citizen on our board. It's not just about the business owners and the property owners. If you just have business owners and property owners, what message are you giving your community? that diversity in terms of the types of representatives and the stakeholder groups that they represent on your board is extremely important in how you communicate and how you develop programs and how you operate. Other government agencies, whether it's the DC Housing Finance Agency, where we're located today, whether it's the library, whether it's the Metropolitan Police Department, whether it's the Deputy Mayor's Office for Planning and Economic Development, whether it's the Office of Planning, all of these are stakeholders that have a role to play in achieving the success that you're hoping to have in terms of transformation and revitalization in your communities. The media are extremely important. Now you might say, well, the Washington Post isn't going to do an article about, my Main Street effort. Well, they may very well be interested in something about the story that you're trying to develop and that you're trying to communicate. And while there certainly are many different kinds of media that might be closer to home, whether there's a community newspaper, for example, in our area, Mid-City DC is the community newspaper, but whether it's the Hill Rag or East of the River or the Northwest Current, depending on what part of the city you're located in, traditional media are important. We're going to talk a little bit about social media too, but radio is very important if you've got events, whether you're trying to do outreach for events, or whether you're trying to get coverage, representative of media, whether they're physically located in your immediate Main Street district or whether they're not, they're definitely stakeholders as well. Nonprofit organizations. Lots of folks don't realize that Main Streets is 50% economic development and 50% historic preservation. That might be a surprise to some of you. My background in terms of interest in community development came out of the fact that I've been a historic preservationist for as long as I can remember. So whether you have a neighborhood historic preservation organization or whether the DC Preservation League is a citywide historic preservation organization is your de facto historic preservation organization, that's an important area for you to be looking at as a stakeholder. But also, whether you have friends groups for your library or your recreation center, whether you have a parent-teacher organizations at your schools, all of these nonprofit organizations have resources and information and insights that are important to your Main Street. Property owners and developers. Some people would say, duh. Yes, they are very important, and perhaps in some ways the most important stakeholder groups, because very often they have some of the greatest accumulations of resources that you're going to be able to tap into in order to be successful. But again, they are just one of many stakeholder types that you need to take into consideration. And they also can be sources of volunteers and support for individual projects, not just the organization overall. Residents, again, duh. Why are we going through the process of starting a Main Street if not to improve the quality of life and to create additional retail options, for the residents in the neighborhood? So it's important to be, communicating with residents, especially in the early going, to try to find out what is the vision, what is the goal for the organization overall, what types of businesses are you interested in seeing come to the area, what kind of legacy businesses are you interested in supporting, which ones is the community not interested in supporting, which ones really don't fit in to a neighborhood potentially, or the vision of the neighborhood for the future. Schools, colleges, and universities. Some folks would say, what role do young people have to play in terms of the revitalization of the neighborhood? We're revitalizing it ultimately for the next generation or for future generations. It's not just about us, who are making the decisions today. Young people are fantastic sources of volunteer hours. For example, at Shaw Main Streets, we've always had interns every semester from colleges and universities around the city, working on projects. They bring resources to the table that allow our team and our other volunteers to be able to focus on other areas. But also sometimes they've got some great ideas. And utilities should not be forgotten. They are providing critical parts of the network that allows a neighborhood to develop. And one thing that you might not think about is if you decide that restaurants are what you want to be focusing on, a lot of restaurants are going to be going into buildings, especially older construction, that don't have kind of gas lines or electrical service that you need in order to be able to have those types of operations. So, they're stakeholders too. They have an interest in your success because, hey, they're going to be, billing their services every month to those particular businesses. So those are all examples of stakeholders. Also, you need to think about the range of demographics for the people that you're trying to communicate with. So I mentioned, young people, but also the 20 and 30-somethings are in some cases, or in many cases, going to be your strongest pool of volunteers because they, are eager and to get engaged and often have time to be able to dedicate to your activities, but also because in many cases that's going to be the prime area for your target audience for your businesses. So you definitely want to be communicating with them as well. Some of us that are advancing in age, I like to think of myself as a pre-senior. Not a senior citizen yet, but moving in that direction, hoping to become a senior citizen. And obviously, seniors have a great wealth of experience from their life experiences. If they're retired, they have time to be able to dedicate to the main streets. Our current board chair is a retiree, a former Xerox executive. And someone that when she was still working, I always wanted to get her to come on our board, and she said, no, I'm too busy right now, but when I retire, I promise I'll get involved. And she did keep that promise. So it's important to remember that every aspect of demographics are important to be represented because that diversity is actually part of the strength of your organization, of your board, as it would be as part of your community. So whether folks are currently employed or they're not currently employed, whether they've got a lot of money in the bank, whether they're homeowners, whether they're renters, none of that matters. I love to tell folks about the experience on my block, the block that I live. I live in a single-family home. My partner and I, own our home. And right now on paper, we're millionaires because we bought our house when it was worth $155,000 and we thought we overpaid at the time. And lo and behold, the real estate market being what it is, if you go online, see that our property is valued at over $1 million. But across the alley from us, for many years, we had subsidized housing, not public housing, but subsidized housing where residents were paying 30% of their income to live there. And in some cases, 30% of their income was $1,000 a year. So, but what's really exciting about that is that we have folks from both sides of the alley that splits our block on committees, working together. And as we talked to them and found out what their priorities were, they wanted the same things. They wanted safer and cleaner streets. They wanted to be able to have jobs in the community. They wanted to be able to walk, to places to spend their money instead of having to get on a bus or get on a train or get in a car. Though, regardless of all these different divides that you would think these people would never have anything in common, they had a lot in common. And that was part of the strength of our organization. We have a very diverse neighborhood, historically African American, but in recent years, with all of the additional development and new residents that we've been able to attract, it's increasingly diverse in terms of ethnicity and race. And in terms of religion, I think we have more houses of worship than any city, any neighborhood in the entire city. I think we've got a couple of churches on just about every block in the city. And believe it or not, sometimes have to talk to people that really don't like what it is that you're proposing to do. Before you even have figured out what it is that you're going to be doing, they're going to be resistant. We have those kinds of issues in the neighborhood. We have some of the largest pools of affordable housing in the entire city. And there were folks that were obviously very concerned that, the construction of the convention center, increase in property values, were going to push them out of the neighborhood. And that was a reasonable concern. But, so we had to make sure that we were listening, that we were asking the right kinds of questions, so that, we had that at the table. And we were not making decisions for them, but we were making decisions with them in terms of what our priorities were going to be and how we were going to manage change, in the neighborhood. We had some folks that really just didn't want to have anything to do with Main Streets and did everything that they could possibly to try to get us decertified, to have our funding cut, to get me fired. All of those things do happen, but you still have to engage with those folks because they're part of your stakeholder base. You can't ignore them, or you ignore them at your own peril, ultimately. Unfortunately, sometimes folks just can't get along. And we lost one of our early Main Street groups, one of our first designation for the class of 2002 was 14th and U Main Streets. The board of 14th and U Main Streets was made up, of a great range of stakeholders, but when it came down to making decisions about what the vision was for the organization and how they were going to move forward, they came to a point where they could not agree. Half of the board wanted to focus on business development, marketing, supporting existing businesses, attracting new businesses. The other half of the board wanted to focus on job training, culture, and they just decided that they would rather discontinue their operations rather than to continue to work together. It's hard to believe, and unfortunately, 14th U has suffered as a result of the fact that they have not had that kind of leadership, that kind of involvement, and businesses in some ways have been struggling ever since. Here in the Shaw Main Streets area, what we decided to do was, yes, we're not always going to agree on everything, but let's focus on the things that we can agree on, and let's put everything else that we can't agree on right now in what we call the parking lot. We're going to put those issues on the side. We're going to come back to them when we have the resources and we have made gains in other areas that we can agree on. So, and as a result, we've thrived. We've become a Great American Main Street Award winner, and 14th and U hasn't. And there are definitely things that would be a lot different on 14th and U, had they been able to just follow that methodology and continue to have a Main Street supporting their development. You need to use every tool at your disposal in order to communicate. And that's old school and new school. So you need to use email and listservs if that's how people want to be communicated with. You need to, actually put stuff in the mail to folks. We don't do as much mail at Shaw Main Streets as we would like, because there's a cost associated with it, and a lot of people think that that's old school. Nobody reads junk mail anymore. But sometimes that is the best way to get something, to get guaranteed it's going to get into people's hands, to mail them a postcard or send out a letter. Events are a great way to communicate, and that's not just your events, but that's going to other people's events. It's going to ANC meetings and making presentations there. It's going to community association meetings, civic association meetings. So every event is an opportunity to spread the message and to hear what people think and to ask questions and to find out what the reactions are to your proposals and the efforts that you're undergoing. Flyers and postcards, again, people sometimes say it's like nobody reads that stuff. Well, sometimes you need to be able to actually put something in people's hands, because that's the way that they expect it to be communicated, especially if folks are on the wrong side of the digital divide. There is still a digital divide. There's plenty of people that don't have smartphones and don't have email and don't go to websites. So sometimes you have to be able to give them hard copy so that they can process that information and they have the opportunity to engage and be part of your decision making and part of the activities in your neighborhood. Newsletters. We actually have some copies of Shaw Main Street's news that we put on the table outside, and it's actually a tool that some people, again, think, well, it's like, why isn't it just an email newsletter? Well, again, there are folks that aren't going to receive that email newsletter, and there are some folks of a certain age that would rather have something in their hands and actually read an article about neighborhood history or a list of new businesses, read the story about how a particular business came to be in the neighborhood, hear about particular successes and how volunteers have been engaged. These are, it's old school, but it works, folks. And if you do it right, it doesn't have to cost you anything. And we'll talk about how we were able to accomplish that in a little bit as well. Polls and surveys. One of the earliest things that any Main Street does is to try to conduct surveys to try to get an idea of what the priorities are for the community, but you can do those at any time. And you can also do them online as well as on paper. So SurveyMonkey is a great tool if you haven't used it before. If you're deciding what of a number of different cuisines you want to try to attract in terms of new restaurants that might come to your neighborhood. It's a great way to be able to get information about those priorities so that you can go out and convince somebody to come and open that type of business in your service area. And we did that very successfully, and that's why we are now an internationally recognized dining destination because of the decisions and the feedback that we got from the polls and surveys that we conducted. Posters, again, very old school, just make sure that you do them legally. In DC, there's a lot of places where you can't put up posters unless it's a campaign poster. Electronic media and social media, obviously extremely important. When we first started the Art All Night Festival back in 2011, we had a very small budget, but we decided to invest in a social media consultant. We thought maybe we'd get 2,000 or 3,000 people that first year. We got 10,000 people. Now we spend more time with social media, training our businesses on social media and using social media to communicate than anything else, but still making sure that we still do some of the old-fashioned kind of promotions and postcards and the like to make sure that we get to everyone. Swag. So hopefully you picked up some of our swag on the way in. We've got a bunch of different magnets with some of the public art of the neighborhood, and some of our slogans seen in Shaw. We have a campaign that is our current branding, which is Love Shaw, with our hashtag, and I've got a couple of t-shirts for folks that may want one here later. This is a walking billboard. One easier way to communicate, and both for your volunteers and your staff as they're walking around the neighborhood and events, but also for folks in the neighborhood. And it's like, what's Shaw Main Street? What's that about? It's a great way to start the conversation and to make sure that folks have the ability to engage. Everybody needs pens. Hopefully you grab one on the way in. That's a portal to your website, because the website is probably one of the single most important tools that Main Street's used in order to communicate, whether it's putting up your annual reports so that it's easy for everybody to be able to get electronically for folks that don't actually want a hard copy, or whether it's announcements for events. You can actually have your social media feed appear on your website, as we have on our website as well. So use every tool at your disposal. I'd like to take a moment to talk about how we were able to use the Shaw Main Street's newsletter as an effective communication tool, and it evolved over time. Initially, we would do a quarterly newsletter. So It started out just very simple, black and white. The first issue didn't even have any photographs at all. And it was just 4 pages long. And we got to the point where it's been 32, 36, 48 pages in a quarter or semi-annually. And if you have people that are interested in writing, if you're already doing press releases, if you're already using media, you've got the raw material to do a newsletter. I encourage you to use photography very heavily, especially volunteer photographers, to be able to document all your activities and all your events. And soon enough, you've got the makings of a newsletter. You just need, hopefully, a volunteer editor to package that together and make that a reality. And then advertising pays for the newsletter. It pays for itself. You can have it be a benefit for sponsors to have an ad there, or you can sell individual ads. Think about full-page ads or half-page ads. Don't try to sell little quarter-page ads, and it'll kill you in terms of the time of just billing and management of that. But if you do a certain number of hard copies that you can put in coffee shops, libraries, other high recreation centers, other high traffic areas, distribute them through the schools in the neighborhood, and then make it available electronically, promote it through social media, have it downloadable from your website. They're fantastic tools to be able to communicate what you're doing and the impact that you're having, and the opportunities for folks to be engaged.
Say those were semi-annual?
So originally we started doing it quarterly and then semi-annually. Now, because things have evolved for us, we don't do them as often. Basically, it's almost like an annual because we emphasize so much more with the social media. But more traditionally, it's quarterly or semi-annual. So another outside the box, communication technique is a coloring book. Who would think that a coloring book is a way to be able to communicate? But it absolutely is. And it's just not a way to communicate with kids. It's a way to communicate with the parents as well. So we actually came with, rip off and duplicate is a tried and true means of R&D. So at one of the National Main Street conferences I attended, I saw an example from Oklahoma Main Streets where they had a large format coloring book that just had pictures of historic buildings in some of their main streets across the state. And I said, well, let's see how we can try to adapt that, to our neighborhood. We've got a lot of history. So what we decided to do was to do a coloring book that not only looked at some of the historic assets, physical assets, buildings, and landmarks in our neighborhood, but also some of the historic people associated with our neighborhood. So we, paired those up. We had a volunteer neighborhood illustrator do some line drawings based on some photographs that we provided. We got a small grant from the Humanities Council and from one of our developers. And we initially published this. We just distributed it to through the schools in the neighborhood, through the libraries, recreation center, daycare centers. And it turned out to be a fantastic way for people to, number one, appreciate the history in their neighborhood, but also to get them to understand what it is that Main Streets does. And it also allowed intergenerational conversations to be taking place about the things that we were doing in our neighborhood. So, as the kids were coloring, they were asking parents about, what this particular person, what this particular building was. Sometimes the parents didn't know very much about the neighborhood's history, and it's an opportunity for them to learn. And before you know it, we were actually, doing coloring contests. We were having neighborhood tours with school groups and with family groups, so they could put the places with the pictures. And it's been an incredible outreach opportunity, which was subsequently copied by Anacostia Main Streets when there wasn't Anacostia Main Streets. And we've gotten a lot of great interest from around the country in trying to replicate this concept, which, again, we borrowed from somebody else initially. It's also very important to remember that communications is not everything that you're pushing out, but it's also everything that you're soliciting and pulling in. It's sometimes more important to be listening and to be asking the right questions and then stopping and hearing and analyzing what you hear back, then to make sure everybody hears what you're thinking about doing and what you want to do and what you want to accomplish, because it's not all about you. It's about all of those stakeholders that are the reason for you to exist. So always be very mindful that you need to be able to document the input that you get, and that you can then take action on those ideas, because if you don't actually ever recognize that input and act on it, then you miss a great opportunity, because people want to know that you're walking the talk and that you're actually listening to them and what it is that you'd like to hear. And then, of course, as I mentioned before, make sure that there's diversity in the voices that you're listening to. Don't only listen to the developers and the business owners. Make sure that you're listening to the man and woman on the street and all of the folks from the different stakeholder groups that we talked about. So all Main Street organizations are required to undergo a visioning session. And the visioning session that we undertook back in 2004, and this is a photograph from one that we held at Shiloh Baptist Church, really did, give us our marching orders as a nascent organization. And one of the things we asked everybody to come up with 3 priorities. And one of the top priorities that we heard was that the neighborhood was dirty, that DPW wasn't able to manage, trash collection, that there was too much graffiti in the neighborhood, too much trash in the neighborhood, and that they, the neighborhood residents and the business owners and the stakeholders that were at the meeting wanted to see that be a priority. And so that we took that as a challenge, and we actually were leaders in developing the Clean Safe Team program. It is in operation in a number of different neighborhoods around the city, but we started it here back in 2006, here in 14th and U. And it's one of our signature programs today. We've got national attention for how we've engaged ex-offenders primarily as being the folks that actually are providing those services, creating job opportunities, for them in our communities, and then the positive impact on the streets today. So we have just a little bit of time left, so we want to touch on fundraising and fundraising. But the communication skills that we've been talking about are integral to success on both of those scores. So, some people say, I hate to beg. I don't want to be asking for stuff. Well, the reality is that you have to be asking for the types of resources that you need, and whether that's cash or whether that's volunteers or in kind, because the funds that are available from DC Main Streets and from some of the traditional funders aren't going to cover all of the costs that you're going to need to be able to operate and to make all of the special projects that you're going to want to undertake a reality. So everyone that you encounter has some level of resources that they can access, whether they control them personally or they know someone that could be able to provide them. And there's a slide that's in the now very dated slide program that the National Trust provides us. I think they still do sell this, but I decided to share it because I think it's it's a very good tool to try to match up what your resource needs are with the different stakeholders that potentially could provide them. So on one side of the chart, you've got the different projects or the different challenges that are facing the organization, whether you've got an image campaign or a facade improvement program, a newsletter, or paying the rent. And then across the top, you have potential partners that could provide some of those resources. So just going across the top, you've got utilities, newspapers, schools and colleges, the city, churches, building owners, property owners, and the like. And this is a great way to think out the fact that you can do outreach and try to find ways to find the resources, again, both cash, in-kind, and volunteer, to be able to accomplish everything that your Main Street is going to undertake. So sponsorship is the predominant means of private sector fundraising that Shaw Main Street engages in. And we don't really have very few individual owners. We don't have a lot of private philanthropy. But we have sponsors of every range. We have folks that give us $250 a year as a business owner. We have folks that give us $15,000 a year as a sponsor. What are the expectations? Because everybody wants something for their money. It's always important to figure out what it is that potential sponsor or supporter needs or wants that you have. And it has a value. Determine what that value is. So whether it's access to your business owners or property owners or to your residents, or to be able to communicate their products and services, figure out what it is that you have that you're able to provide to those potential supporters and funders so that you can put a price on it and you can monetize that and you can make sure that you can deliver on that so that you can get the resources to do what you need to do. Make the match, make that connection. Don't just come up with gold, silver, bronze levels for your fundraising. Be sure that that you do the best job that you can to ask what your potential supporters are looking for so that you can deliver, and then they in turn can deliver for you. And you have to be persistent. You're not going to be able to get every potential funder to write a check or to provide those resources that you're looking for to become a volunteer the first time that you ask. You've got to go and make sure that you build that relationship, that you continue on a regular basis to communicate what it is that you're doing, why supporting your organization is important, why that project that you need some funding or volunteers for is critical, and why it's important to them to ultimately get the support that you need. So it may take a number of years before you get that particular potential supporter to give you what you need, but you'll often find that over time you'll eventually get all of those supporters in hand. And you might think that any of the no is not an option, sounds a little cliched, but don't settle for no. So you may start asking for $5,000. You may end up realizing that you're not going to get that from them. Get at least $250 out of them. Get something out of them so that you continue that relationship. So the last thing that I want to talk about is a Taste of Shaw, the Shaw Main Street. Shaw Main Street holds all of the national records for funds raised at individual private fundraising events. We've held it for a number of years. No one's come close. What we have come up with is a vehicle that allows our sponsors to focus most of their giving in the year on a single occasion, which is also a venue to promote our restaurants and bars. And as I mentioned before, we're predominantly a hospitality destination. So, it's a win-win situation. Our bars and restaurants get to expose what it is that they do so well, and they've gotten international awards and recognition for it. And we get the opportunity to have our sponsors have their names associated with this event and provide the resources that we need in order to be able to accomplish our objectives. So we can talk a lot more about that individually if you have an interest in that later. But I'd like to ask Dion to come back up so that we can answer a couple of questions, if there are any, and then I appreciate your attention and hope that you find what I wanted done.
I'm trying to keep everyone on schedule. So we've got 5 minutes, maybe 7 minutes for questions. If anybody needs to use the restroom, feel free to just end it. We'll start it's 10:36. We're going to start at 2:42 with the design portion so that we can keep on moving. And so this is it. Any questions? can't get them on.
I'm from Glover Park, which is considering a main street. And my question is about the people who disagree with you. You said it's very important to talk to them. And I wanted to know what the venues are where that happens. When you said that the first thing you do once you know you're going to be a main street is this visioning meeting, and I assume it would start there, but how does that dialogue continue?
Great question. Sometimes it's individual one-on-one conversations. Sometimes it's in public meetings. You always want to have a number of opportunities, especially in the early days of the organization's formation, for people to be able to ask questions, to get information, to process information, to have discussions, to have breakout groups about different topics, to start forming into committees. And all of those are potential opportunities for those kinds of dialogues. But also, it can be in other organizations' meetings. If you're making a presentation at a civic association, at an ANC meeting, or some other venue, then those are opportunities to have those discussions. But always make sure that you provide solid information and you don't take anything personally. You actually are you're trying to be dispassionate, and you're trying to make sure that you understand what the concerns are that are being shared, because often if you have one person raising that concern, there are many people that have those concerns, and you need to be able to respond to them. So, and you respond to them using all of the different tools that we've talked about, whether it's print, whether it's email, whether it's on your website. Use all of those tools to honestly communicate, the fact that you recognize that those concerns exist, and how you would address them, or how you would further the dialogue with the community about them.
Can I just add one thing? I would also suggest that you begin with asset mapping. Just understand who are all of your partners in the community. If there are community-based organizations that are in the communities that you need to build relationships with, find out who they are. Find out who those property owners are first, and then you start building those one-to-one relationships. Meet people where they are. Just start with coffee. I just want to get to know you and find a little bit more about what is going on and why do you disagree. And then you have to show value, and I think that's something Alex really noted very well in his presentation. Yes.
Yes, maybe just state your question, we'll repeat it.
I'm with a Georgetowner, and I live in our your main streets. But in Georgetown, we have a new main street. And some of the things you guys do, like the clean streets, the bid is, we have a really active bid. And so it seems to me as a journalist, there's a little bit of competition or duplication of efforts. So what do you do about that? And we have a really active business organization.
So the question was from Georgetown, and it relates to duplication of services or potential duplication of services. There's a bid in Georgetown that provides clean and safe services and a number of other services. And what is the Main Street going to do that's different? And that's exactly what needs to be defined very, very early is what is it that the Main Street is going to do that is unique and different. You definitely do not want to be butting heads with two different organizations. You want to make sure that you're creating value. So you want to be able to see where the opportunities are to collaborate and to build so that there is even greater impact that's generated. But there are many things that the bids don't do traditionally that Main Streets do focus on. Very often those relate to working with the smaller businesses, engaging more with the community rather than focusing on the property owners.